What's up, y'all? So we're here to talk about another item review where we talk about just, the usefulness of OSRS items for their price point and how worth it they are for a player to buy, maybe where it fits into their progression, etc., etc. Today, we're going to be talking about a Big Daddy weapon. This is the boa Faerdhinen and also the crystal armor set that we are going to be talking about. The crystal armor set does have one or two more points of ranged accuracy than Carol's or Black D'hide, so it does have like a little bit of a standalone merit. But for the most part, like 1 or 2 points of ranged accuracy isn't going to be enough to justify a 36 mil set of armor. What really justifies the armor is the like 30% accuracy and 15% damage that it gives the boa Faerdhinen. So that's why you pretty much, while it's not strictly true to say that there's no reason to wear crystal armor unless you're using a bofa. There's a reason you pretty much only see people wear crystal armor when they're using a bofa, and that's because it's the only situation in which the cost of the armor is in any way justified. So yeah, we're going to be coupling the bow and the armor together. The boa Faerdhinen is a 4-tick ranged main hand weapon, in case you aren't familiar. And this weapon, I will say, to me, is this is the weapon that is like synonymous with like a grinder. Like when I see somebody get the GE and like their full crystal and like their Ava's their Masori assembler, like I know that that person is probably like somebody who's like, really like starting to wet their teeth into PVM, is starting to like build their bank up, and is really like, progressing, basically, because that's what this weapon is all about. This weapon is about helping players progress through the game. I will say that you'll notice that like most of my other videos, you see me like start with the item and show you the item in my house. We're not doing that this time because I don't actually own a boa Faerdhinen or a crystal armor set. I have what I would describe as a max bank, so I would argue that there is no place for a boa Faerdhinen in a max bank, but I am not by any means going to sit here and tell you that this is not a good item. This is a very, very good item. It just isn't like number one best in slot basically anywhere. There's a couple places where it kind of like it's like equivalent basically. We'll get to that in a second. Don't take away from this weapon the fact that it doesn't really have a good place in a max bank, how useful it is. Because this weapon you can think of kind of like a mini shadow. I know you want to think of it as a bow, so you want to think of it as like a mini T-bow, but the reason I say it's more like a mini shadow is because the shadow has just stupidly high attack bonus and disregards monsters' defenses. So pretty much everything's weak to shadow because the shadow can hit everything. The bofa is kind of the same way. It has ridiculously high attack bonus, so all of the really tanky monsters in the game are basically weak to it because it more or less ignores their really high defenses. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the really like particular. Oh, that's the wrong slide. Talk about some of the particular use cases of the boa Faerdhinen. Now I basically like ran out of room here. This is a really good weapon, alright? I'm not going to undersell that. I basically ran out of room here. So I'm sure that this list is not comprehensive. I'm sure that there's also like a few points where you could like argue that it's maybe like second or third, or like, second as opposed to third, but this is like the first, I would say, like 12 or 15 locations I could think of where the boa Faerdhinen is like a really, really important and good item. And you'll notice that like it's second or third best at all of these places, but we'll go through each of these and I'll tell you what weapons are in front of it, and you'll understand why I say this weapon is so good. So Inferno, it is a T-bow alternative, basically. You still are going to rely on your blowpipe mainly in Inferno against most mobs, but when it comes to the meleeers, the majors, and Zuck, you're going to be using your boa Faerdhinen. And that's different than with a T-bow. You can't use a T-bow against meleeers. The T-bow is better, quite a bit better against Zuck and Majors, but yeah, the bofa is a very good weapon for sending Inferno if you don't have a twisted bow. Pretty much everybody already knows that. So this kind of sets the precedent for the rest of these places where the weapon it's trailing is the T-bow, which costs 1.5 bill. So this weapon coming in at about 150 mil for both the weapon and the armor that makes it so good, well that's pretty appealing. And then Akka, it's second best at Akka behind Shadow, Assuming that you can attack it with any weapon at a given point in time, it is the second best weapon at Akka, assuming you're not running like 250s or lower. If you're running like 250s or lower, then Blowpipe is better than bofa, and it's also true that even at high invocations, Blowpipe is better than bofa on Akka's shadows. But on Akka himself, Boa Faerdhinen is the second best weapon on like a 300 plus on Akka himself after Shadow. At Wardens, it is the third best in slot weapon behind T-Bow and Shadow, two mega rares that both cost over $1 bill apiece, so yeah, it's the best weapon for its price point by a mile. Vasa in Chambers, it is the second best weapon after Twisted Bow. It's oftentimes, I've heard, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but in the past, I have heard Irons say that the bofa was basically required for them to start doing CMs because otherwise Vasa was a brick wall. Like, obviously they don't have a T-Bow yet, but without a bofa, they didn't think that they could really even get through that room, and the bofa is kind of what made the difference for them. It's really strong at Vasa, a boss that's really hard to hit, honestly. Lizardman Shamans in Chambers, it's third best behind T-Bow and Shadow once again. I do have an asterisk here in that Lizardman Shamans are actually technically weakest to Blowpipe. Like, that's technically the best weapon on Lizardman Shamans, period. But it's really, like, shitty and hard to use a Blowpipe on Lizardman Shamans. Nobody does it for good reason. So that's why I put an asterisk here and just say it's third best. Like, we're not going to count Blowpipe, it's just third best. And then Skeletal Mystics, it is once again third best behind Shadow and T-Bow. Like, you'll notice that every time it's coming in second and third, it's coming in second and third behind Shadow and or T-Bow, which are much, much more expensive weapons, and therefore this weapon has a really strong place to shine in all of these locations if you're like somebody who can't afford those weapons quite yet. The Abyssal Portal at Vespula, it is second or third best in slot, depending on if you're doing a reg or a CM. If it is a reg, it is second best behind Shadow. If it is a CM, it is third best behind Shadow and T-Bow. And then at Olmhead, it is third best after a Twisted Bow and then a Dragon Hunter crossbow. So that is a cheaper weapon, but it's also a bit more of a niche weapon. So, you know, that's not really something that you can hold against bofa that much, can you? And then at Bandos, this is the second best weapon after Shadow. You can definitely do a lot of Bandos with this weapon. It's super reliable there and super good. At Kree, I should have put an asterisk on this one too, because like the Soulflame Horn and Noxious Halberd could potentially like make an argument that it's like fourth, but I just counted T-Bow and Shadow and put it as third behind them. Once again, it does a really good job punching through defenses, and Kree has a lot of defenses, and so it does a really good job at Kree compared to most weapons. Same at Sarah, who has a ton of defenses. It is third best behind Shadow and T-Bow. Yeah, I'm kind of just a broken record at this point, aren't I? It's like best after Shadow and T-Bow, like pretty much everywhere that you're using ranged weaponry. And then the one exception I will say is at Leviathan. It is second best in slot, but it's like actually basically equivalent to best in slot. It's basically tied with a Zerite crossbow at Leviathan, so you can basically consider it a best in slot weapon there, although not quite. The Zerite crossbow is like a small margin better, but it actually depends on the HP. It's ultimately, like I said, just a really, really good weapon there at Leviathan. And the weapon it's compared to is, again, more expensive than a ZCB. Coliseum, it serves as a good budget ranged option. I've heard of a lot of irons doing their Coliseum with a bofa and like them thinking that it did a really good job for them there. So yeah, it can serve as much like an Inferno, a budget ranged option at Colo, and then that's basically like where I ran out of room. The bofa is a very versatile, very strong weapon that if you're doing pretty much any content in the game, like I should have had something about Phantom Muspa on here, for example. There should be something about Zulra on here. It's usable at both of those places as well. It's very serviceable at both of those locations. Yeah, so the bofa has a lot of things going for it. Pretty much any place you're using ranged, and I don't just mean ranged specifically, I mean like distance attacking. Like even places where like, you know, magic is potentially an option, there's still oftentimes the bofa emerging as a viable option at those locations. So ultimately I would say the bofa is, like, I personally got my bofa Like I rushed it. Like I got like 200 mil in gear so I could like grind Vorkath basically, and then once I had like 300 mil in gear, I sold it all and I got a bofa and full crystal and started sending TOA. And that's like I thought that was looking back, I thought that was pretty efficient. I still do. It's ultimately a weapon that I think you should acquire pretty early because it's a weapon that's going to start making a very big difference for you very early. And also, you know, it eventually gets supplanted by other stuff later on, but we're talking about much, much later down the line. This is going to be a very, very important weapon to you for a very long time. And there's really no overstating just how much this weapon is like a progressing player's best friend, basically. It truly is. Like, the one place I can think of where you don't really use a boa Faerdhinen is Tob. So maybe if you're like a complete Tob rat, you never leave Tob and you just do Tob all day, every day, then bofa maybe doesn't really have a good place in your progression. But if you're somebody who likes to do God Wars, if you're somebody who likes to do TOA, if you like to do Cox, if you like to do DT2 bosses, if you like to do, oh geez, Colosseum, Inferno, like any of these, bofa has a very significant, like any of that very, very wide variety of content, then yeah, bofa has a place in the item progression for you. A very early and very important one. It's an item that I'm harping on, but I'm harping on for good reason. I highly, highly recommend this item to a newer player. Definitely. Once they feel like their bank can handle the purchase, they should probably try to send it sooner rather than later. Obviously, it depends on the content that they're doing, but in my opinion, that's where it belongs in their progression. Yeah, so that is my take on the boa Faerdhinen as an item, and I hope it was helpful. I'll see you in the next one.